Hello everyone, I'm Baxter and I'm the Curator of Archaeology for Leeds Museums and Galleries. It has been Dying Matters Awareness Week this week and we're hoping to actively encourage everyone to talk more about death, dying and bereavement. So I'm going to talk about death today using a range of objects from the Leeds Museums and Galleries collection. Death is something every person experiences, but approaches to it vary across time and from culture to culture. In this way, we can suggest there is no single experience or interpretation of dying and death. Scientific definitions focus on the irreversible process, where vital functions like brain activity, respiration, and the beating of the heart cease. However, there's more to death than this, and we will see in this short talk that human beings have interpreted the experience in many different ways, often as an end, but also as a beginning. Some of the earliest encounters with death in the museum collection are from ancient Egypt. The contents of most museums overrepresent death as opposed to life in Egypt. And this is because what has survived has tended to be tombs and the objects and human remains placed within them. And because tombs and mummification were very expensive, we end up looking at ancient Egypt through the narrow lens of the wealthy and the dead. The mummified remains of Nessi-Amun, a priest who lived in Egypt over 3,000 years ago, are no exception. His coffin and coffin lids are beautifully preserved and show his importance in the temple of Amun in Thebes during his life, and of the hopes of the next life. On the right of this slide is his outer coffin lid, which is covered in depictions of gods and goddesses and hieroglyphic texts, and these assist the dead person's journey into the afterlife. On the left is Nessi-Amun himself as shown on his coffin, making an offering. These depictions demonstrate the strong concern the ancient Egyptians had for the afterlife. Their treatment of the body after death is well documented. The ideal was for the dead body to be mummified with natron salt, wrapped in linen and placed in a sarcophagus. The physical body was needed for the afterlife, as were the many possessions they were buried with. A bit closer to Leeds, here is a drawing of a grave excavated as part of the Wattle Psych Excavations in 2007, when the A1 was being upgraded near Wetherby. 57 buried individuals had to be excavated because of the new road. In the drawing you can see the unusual double burial of an older woman and a younger adult man, and they may have been mother and son, dating to the Iron Age about 2,000 years ago. Whatever you think about human remains being looked after in museums, the dead are all around us, and they'll continue to be discovered during building developments and road upgrades. So let's move away from human remains to a range of objects with a connection to death and dying across the departments of the museum. We move on to Asia, where we have here a carved stone relief depicting the death of the Buddha. It dates to around the 2nd century AD, and it's likely from northern India, carved in the Gandhara style. The historical Buddha was a wealthy prince who lived during the 5th century BC in present-day Nepal. Early in his life, he witnessed the suffering of other beings and renounced his earthly status and wealth in order to seek enlightenment. Carvings in this style are renowned for their realistic depictions of the Buddha, and the Buddha's death is common subject matter. Often the Buddha is shown lying on his right side and surrounded by attendants who demonstrate their devotion. As well as being a significant moment in the life of the Buddha, depictions of his death emphasize the moment he achieved the state of nirvana. This was an end to his cycle of birth and rebirth, and a final state of non-existence and freedom from suffering. After his death at around the age of 80, the Buddha's body was cremated and his remains distributed among his followers. The mounds or stupas that covered and guarded his remains became important pilgrimage sites for Buddhists. Here we can see an image of a gold-coloured stupa. Stupas come in many different sizes, from the miniature to the monumental. And although this example is only several centimetres high and made from metal, its purpose is to remind Buddhists that after their death they can achieve nirvana by following the example set by the Buddha. To the left is a photo of a Hindu funeral taken in India in 2011, and to the right is a British Victorian mourning dress from around 1880. In many Asian cultures, white and orange are auspicious colours associated with reverence and mourning, while in Britain the traditional colour worn during the period of mourning and at the funeral itself is black. In Britain, people wore white for mourning until the early 19th century, but now black is the most common choice for showing respect and sorrow. Approaches to funerals are often informed by religious traditions and attitudes as to the status of the body and of the spirit or the soul. The behaviours of those involved in the process, such as mortuary staff and religious specialists like priests and mourners, may often follow similar protocol. In this slide, we have a painting called A Village Funeral by Frank Hall from 1872. It depicts sorrowful mourners in a funeral procession in a village churchyard. The gravestones here are an example of the way the death of an individual can be memorialised. The mournful expressions of the people and the large overhanging trees add to the darker subject matter of the painting. In Britain by the late Victorian period, rituals, funerals and mourning had often become an elaborate affair. Christian death rites often emphasised the resurrection of Jesus and the comforting hope for eternal life of all believers. This coffin was produced in 2017 by A.W. Hainsworth & Sons, a Leeds company. It's made of wool and highlights that in the UK today there are many options when it comes to coffins. Traditionally, coffins here are made of wood such as oak, but more recently a range of materials have become available like wool, wicker or even cardboard. Eco-coffins and urns are becoming increasingly popular because they're made out of natural fibres which are biodegradable. Many people equate being buried as a way of returning to nature, so they want the process to be as environmentally friendly as possible. Cremation, however, has become the preferred choice for many people in Britain. Around 3/4 of deaths here are handled by cremation. While Christians believe in the resurrection of the body, it doesn't mean they can't be cremated. The power of God extends to resurrecting even those whose bodies have been disposed of. This Leeds pottery figure of Andromache with an urn was made in about 1790. Urns were traditionally ceramic, and the figure here is shown holding the urn, which can be interpreted as representing attachment to the deceased, even after death and cremation. On the right is a cardboard urn made in 2016. Described as a scattering ashes tube, the image on this particular example emphasises serenity and the calming influence of nature. In cases where ashes are scattered, the location has often already been decided by the deceased when they were alive. This emphasises the importance of making your wishes for your own death known to others. Aside from funerals and the treatment of the body after death, objects in the museum collection can also relate to feelings of grief and mourning. Objects can reflect personal grief of a loved one. This British mourning brooch on the left was made in the 1800s and would have been worn to remember the dead. It contains a lock of hair of the deceased, and the gold text around the edges reads, "In memory of." A lock of hair or other physical remnants may also provide the mourner with a sense of closeness to the deceased. The other objects on this slide are Japanese memorial tablets from around 1880 to 1930. They would be placed in a Buddhist temple or in a smaller family shrine in the home. The inscription on the larger tablet is for a man who died aged 80. The smaller tablet records 3 family members, including a stillborn child. Sending a sympathy card can be an expression of shared sorrow and support for those who have lost loved ones. These cards were collected by the museum in 2017. They are from different religious traditions: Judaism, Islam, Christianity, and Wicca paganism, but they perform the same function, using comforting verses to show support for those who are grieving. Feelings of loss can also be a group experience. Collective grief happens when a community, large or small, experiences loss together, often after an event that is considered a tragedy. The square on the left is printed on very thin paper. This is a souvenir from 1928. The Prince of Wales, who was later King Edward VIII, and 11,000 veterans and war widows travelled to Belgium, where they held a service at the Menin Gate 10 years after the end of the First World War. The other image here is of a tabloid newspaper front page dated September the 8th, 1997. It has a 20-page memorial pullout of the People's Funeral, or the funeral of Princess Diana. An estimated 2.5 billion people watched the funeral worldwide, and it was one of the largest ever televised events. The public outpouring of grief went on for many months, with over 1 million bouquets of flowers and tributes left outside Kensington Palace in her memory. Following a person's death, objects of great importance may be commissioned to commemorate them or communicate with them. Objects may relate to a person's likeness or their perceived essence or interests while alive. This tomb monument from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, made in around 1920, is of a seated male figure and is likely a tribute to a deceased individual. The headdress and facial marks indicate the deceased was a man of high rank, while armlets and anklets also suggest that he was important. The use of white pigment on sculpture of this kind is often associated with death and mourning. In some West and Central African societies, it is believed that once deceased, a person can still influence the social world of the living. The deceased becomes an aspect of the natural world, albeit less visible than elements such as trees, rivers, or rocks. A sculpture such as this one would be commissioned to harness their spirit and as an act of commemoration. In the centre is a replica of a memorial head from the kingdom of Ife in Nigeria, likely a royal or chiefly person. The realism and detail shows that the deceased was highly regarded and gives us a sense of the presence of the deceased. The final object is a tombstone made in white marble, this time from ancient Greece, dating to around 100 BC. The inscription tells us that it shows a man called Agron and his son bidding farewell to the deceased, who is seated. For many people, death is not just an end, but also a new beginning. Many people believe in a soul which is separate from our bodies, which will travel to an afterlife after death. Others think that after death the human body returns to the soil as part of nature's cycle of birth, growth, death, and renewal. Some people believe that our deceased ancestors are still present in our lives, and others do not believe in a soul or an afterlife at all. Whatever your beliefs, death is a time of transition. On the left is a fragment of the ancient Egyptian Book of the Dead written on papyrus, dating to around 1300 BC. The Book of the Dead is a collection of spells which was believed to act as a guidebook to the deceased on their journey to the afterlife, the kingdom of Osiris. On the right is a ceramic figurine of an angel in the Christian tradition, which dates to the 1800s. Angels appear in many religions as celestial beings, sometimes believed to act as messengers between people and God, and they are often associated with heaven. And here you can see a selection of leaflets, 2 of them produced by the Dying Matters organisation. These leaflets encourage people to have a good death and think about practical things we can all do now to make that process easier, such as making a funeral plan, making a will, and thinking about organ donation. The extent to which death is discussed varies from household to household, but discussing matters at a suitable time can ease distress further down the line. And I couldn't talk about this subject without mentioning the circumstances we find ourselves in today, in the middle of a global pandemic. The Museum Service has been collecting objects to represent the COVID-19 pandemic and the experiences and reflections of people in Leeds. It is a very difficult time for a lot of people, and more than ever, death has become part of our daily lives on both a personal and a global level. Today's talk is the start of a process which will culminate in an exhibition at Leeds City Museum in 2024, which will explore many of these themes around death, dying and bereavement in partnership with the Dying Matters Leeds organisation. I hope you found today's talk interesting, and I hope you'll make a visit to see the exhibition in 2024. Thank you.